Do you often get this feeling that life was better when you were a kid? If so, stay with me in today's episode, and I'm sure that by the end, you'll walk away with practical tips as to what you can do about this feeling instead of just sitting back and thinking about it. Let's go. Hello, good people of the internet. Welcome to another episode of the Unlearning Playground podcast. This is your host, Chetan Narang. It's taken me almost, I think, a month since I released the first episode of season 2. But if you've been following along on YouTube, I've been busy uploading a lot of different videos and short content as well. But this podcast is definitely what I wanted to gear towards. So today's episode is going to be another special one. Because like I mentioned in the previous episode, the theme going forward is going to be around questions, and questions inspired from a lot of different sources, but especially questions that I myself am meditating on these days. So today's question is, I think, a very important one. It's something that we ponder about maybe sometimes when we're alone, maybe sometimes when we are with friends and partners and relatives with whom we can open up. But definitely one that we ponder about when we are in those lower recesses of our life, when we are feeling low. And that is, was life better when we were a kid? Was life better when we were young, when there were, lesser cares in the world maybe? So yeah, I'm going to deep dive into this topic today. So let's get started with it. But before we do that, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, make sure you do that. This should be a good time to do that right now. If you're following along on any podcast platform, make sure at the end of this episode you go onto YouTube, check out the Unlearning Playground and subscribe to the channel, because the YouTube channel is quite different from the podcast as of now. I'm uploading a lot of different video content on the YouTube channel, so make sure you follow along with that too. So let's get into today's episode then. Yeah, so like I mentioned, there were definitely lesser cares in the world, right, when we were young. I think for starters, there was little worry about what's going to be prepared for dinner tonight. It was always mom or dad taking care of it. You did not definitely have to worry about your grocery shopping or how much taxes you owe to the government by the end of this year, or what career option should you look for. Should you look for a career switch? Should you look to become a manager, or should you look to deep dive into whatever field you're in right now, or should you pick a different career altogether? There were definitely lesser cares in the world. I'll give you that. And I think one more aspect was that when we were little, it was always that there were for at least the lucky ones, there were parents around or grandparents around to take care of them, right? So you didn't have to be on your own, right? It was not only you taking care of yourself. That is somewhat of a slippery slope, but it's definitely one of those things that makes us feel that yes, life was better when we were kids, because you could always offload your worries to, let's say, your parents or your grandparents or your uncles and aunts, or to maybe a lot of different people if you were even luckier. That was definitely it. And I think one more aspect which I can think about is that life was also simpler when we were kids, wasn't it? And this is not just coming from the context that I'm a 90s kid, and back in the day we didn't have, let's say, too many distractions or too many gadgets around. But life was just simpler. They were just lesser things to think about, lesser things to worry about, like we just talked about. Life for kids at least used to be quite simpler. I think even now, kids' lives are definitely simpler compared to adult lives. Whenever I'm talking about lives being simple, I'm always reminded of this interaction I had with a manager of mine once. We were in a call where I was getting promoted, and what he told me was something that always stuck with me. He told me that while promoting me, he told me that, you know what, Chetan, as you keep progressing up the ladder, up the corporate ladder, up in your career, the expectation in the role and the responsibilities and overall your job overall keeps getting harder and harder. And that's always going to happen. It's going to get, in fact, the words he used was, I think, it keeps getting exponentially harder as you keep growing. And I think I just nodded in agreement when I was told this. But something about that just stuck with me. And when I was in a meditative session back in the day, it came back to me, and I was thinking about there is something definitely wrong with simply accepting this, isn't it? I mean, I think I'm not insane if I say that if I'm spending my precious life energy doing something, the least it should do is make my life simpler, or at least not harder, right? And if something is exponentially gonna keep getting harder and harder, there is definitely something wrong with simply accepting that as a fact. And I, I think that's sane. I think you can very easily see that this is something, you know, I agree that your responsibilities increase. I agree that as you become a more senior person in any sphere of your life, your responsibilities increase, and the things that you are supposed to do, or you ought to do, or you can do for that matter, obviously become more impactful. Keeping that aside, your life should not keep getting harder. Your daily life, how you spend your day, if that is getting harder and harder with every single step up the ladder, I think that's not a ladder worth climbing. So, yeah, I think this is also something which is quite easily accepted in corporates across the globe these days, that as you keep progressing up the ladder, your life keeps getting harder and harder, exponentially harder. You have to maybe put in more hours too, especially if you're in a toxic environment. You have to definitely put up with a lot more as you keep progressing up the ladder. And therefore, yes, this is an argument which I would make for life being simpler when you were a kid, when you are a kid. And exponentially, it keeps getting more and more complex. I think we can do better. I think we can definitely do better. And what I discovered again, as I think about it, what I discovered later on was that it's got less to do with what you are doing, but it's got more to do with how you're doing it. It's got less to do with what you think about life, or what aspects of life you act out on, but rather more to do with how you are looking at life as a whole. That is what makes a lot of difference in things such as this. And along those lines, I think one of the hows that you can change in your life is you become more childlike. You become not childish. I'm being very careful with my words right now. Don't become childish, but become childlike. And I think there's a lot of difference between these two words. If we were to talk about someone being childish, I think the image in our minds should be one of maybe someone who's stubborn, maybe someone who does not have too much discernment about whether or not he or she should act in a particular situation, whether or not he or she should control their emotion in the moment, whether or not they should act on a particular thought of the moment, etc. Or maybe also someone who's throwing tantrums, quite similar to the previous point that I made. All of these would be somewhat childish behaviors. On the other side, if I was to put it into one term, maybe a childish behavior would also be more reactive in nature, right? A child reacts to the environment much more than an adult would. A proper adult should be responding to situations rather than simply reacting. So childish behaviors would be these reactive behaviors, throwing tantrums, being stubborn, not knowing whether or not to act on a particular thought or a particular emotion, etc. And when I say we should become more childlike, I mean all aspects of being a kid apart from this. So let's talk about that. I think we will build on this theme a lot in today's episode, because this is something that I'd mentioned here. There is this quote. I don't know if this is directly from the Bible or if this is a part of Christian mythology, but there is some mention of the fact that no one enters the kingdom of God unless he is childlike. And I think there is a lot to be unpacked there. And also, I think even the person who wrote that particular quote was being very specific with words, because even the word used there is childlike, not childish. And I think being childlike is everything to do with a kid, apart from what all we talked about, apart from that reactive nature. So let's see. I think this is the first segment. I'm going to pause here for at least 5 seconds or so, and then let's get started with all the things that make you childlike and all the things that are a part of being a child that you can benefit from if you incorporate them as an adult. Let's get into it. All right, let's get back into it. I just took a little break from that last scene, and I just checked the score online for the cricket match that is on right now. And out of habit, I also opened up YouTube Studio, and I saw that the subscriber count increased by 1. If it was one of you guys who telepathically knew that you should subscribe, I am grateful. Anyway, let's get into it. So we were talking about the qualities of a child, of being childlike, that can benefit an adult, that can be useful to an adult. And in that list, the first and foremost quality that I would talk about is being more spontaneous. Being more spontaneous with life, being more spontaneous with your own emotions, your own expressions, and being more spontaneous with people around you. And whenever I'm thinking about this, I'm always reminded of this hilarious video I saw on the internet. The internet is so full of garbage these days, but there is always some sort of gold available for you if you're looking in the right places, right? So one of my favorite memes on the internet is this reel of a guy sitting and his wife calls him from behind and says, "Babe, will you love me even if I get fat?" And the guy, of course, he knew. So without even thinking, without even blinking his eyes, says, "Of course, babe, I will. I'll still love you if you're fat." And their kid from the background goes, "But mom, you are fat." And that it's just so funny. This is how spontaneous kids are, right? This is how expressive kids are with what they're thinking. Now, I do not want you to become spontaneous like that, in the sense that you end up hurting people around you. That's not the spontaneity we're looking for. So one of the key things that you should look about when we talk about becoming more childlike is that you should become childlike, but with the discernment of an adult, with the discernment of a well-meaning, a well-performing, a whole adult, which means that you have to be spontaneous with people around you. You have to be expressive with people around you, but you needn't become hurtful to them. But there's also a big but here. There could be times, especially with people whom you love, where you have to be hurtful to them, where you have to tell things to them that no one else will. And even if it hurts them, you are supposed to be the ones to do that. Now, that is a behavior that is maybe not too childlike, but if you are an adult who is looking to become more childlike, this is not a behavior that you should let go of. The ability to say things, especially to people you love, especially to people that you care about, that you want to grow ahead in their life, do not lose the ability to be able to correct them when they're wrong. Do not lose the ability to tell them where they're wrong or where they're limited, especially if the situation permits you to, right? I think that's important. But having said that, now that when we talk about being more spontaneous, being more expressive, I think one thing that I particularly love about kids is, especially kids who are, I don't know, maybe around 3 years old, 4 years old, is their ability to say no. The ability to say no about something that just doesn't work for them. Now, when it comes to kids, maybe sometimes their no's are surrounded by a whole bunch of tantrums, but I still appreciate the quality of being able to say no, especially in a crowd of people that they might be worrying about. But even there, I think with being a child, because you have not learned a lot of those societal patterns yet of being shameful of asserting what you want to have, let's say for dinner. Let's say you have not learned the pattern of bowing down every time to somebody else's wishes, etc. You kind of let go of your ability to say no in those cases. But as a kid, because you've not learned all of those toxic patterns yet, your ability to say no is definitely one of the things that attracts me, at least. And therefore, when I talk about becoming more childlike, becoming more spontaneous with life, I would definitely say that this is one thing we can learn from kids. The ability to say no. The ability to assert what we want in a particular situation. And again, I'll again put a big but here, saying that you should be able to do that. You should be able to say no. You should be able to define your boundaries. But as an adult, you should be able to do that without all the tantrums of a kid. So you should be able to do that healthily. Now, how that expresses itself obviously depends on the situation. But I think this is something that you should consider. Become more childlike, become more spontaneous, become more expressive of your boundaries, of your no's, and along with that, have the discernment of an adult as to how you go about doing that. And also, when I talk about becoming more expressive as a kid, I think this is an example that always springs to my mind. It was just, I think, March. So maybe 5-6 months ago, my nephew was visiting me from the US, and he's a beautiful little 3-year-old kid, I think, at the time. And we were gelling along really well. We would go to the parks, and I was on holiday from work too. So spent some great time together. One of the early mornings, it was, I think, close to 7 or 8ish in the morning, and I was supposed to go outside the home to buy some groceries and whatnot. And I just asked him if he wants to tag along. He was busy playing something, and he said, "No, I don't want to go." And I was in a hurry, so I rushed away. I just said, "Okay," and I rushed away. And I was waiting for the elevator outside our home, and this guy rushes up to me, and he says, he calls me Fufu. So he says, "Fufu, why did you run away from me?" And he was not being jolly about it. He was actually almost on the verge of crying. And I asked him, I told him that, "No, I didn't run away from you. I was in a hurry. I asked you, but you said no. And therefore I ran away because I was in a hurry." And he was like, "Oh, okay, I also want to come with you." And we went along. Now, why I'm telling you this is, I think I might be exaggerating, but as a little kid, it must not be a good feeling to see someone that you are gelling along with, someone that you're loving at the moment. It must not be a good feeling to see that person run away from you. And the moment he had that feeling that Fufu just ran away from me, he approached me and he expressed his concern about it. And I just loved him for it. I remember there was almost a tear in my eye. And I think it was because of the fact that I never want him to lose this innocence. I never want him to lose this art of being able to express his emotions right then and there. And he did not really do that in a tantrum fashion like kids would usually do that. But as an adult, we definitely lose that ability. A lot of us do. A lot of us become too shameful of being able to express if something didn't really gel well with us. We lose the ability to, even express our emotions to people who matter to us. I remember I was in a conversation with someone quite recently, and she had a fight, not really a fight, but she had let's say, a series of disagreements with a friend of hers. And she was expressing it to me, and she was telling me that all of this is happening and all of that. And my first question to her when she was asking me for a solution was that, does she know about it? Does your friend know about it? In fact, before that, I asked her, how good a friend is she? And she said, we are best friends. We are inseparable. And then I asked her, does she know about it? About all of this? And she says, no. Her best friend did not know that she was feeling let down by her actions. This is how much shameful we become of our own emotions when we grow up. And therefore, when I talk about becoming more childlike, I would definitely stress on this point of becoming more expressive with what you are feeling. Because it's important. We have all been involved in situations in our families, in our workplace, where we see a bunch of people arguing, or let's not talk about a bunch of people, where we see a couple of people arguing. And if you are kind of a viewer of that conversation, you can see that they're arguing about something that did not really happen just now. They're arguing about some things that have been a cobweb of situations maybe a good few months or years ago. Because we keep our emotions bottled up, because we keep ourselves small from expressing what we are feeling, even around people who matter to us, all of those emotions, all of those repressed feelings come out in quite negative fashions. And if you really think about it, that is when adults throw tantrums. So if you were rather be more childlike and express your emotions in a healthy fashion then and there. When a situation permits you to do that, I think we'll all be golden. That is all the therapy you need. Express your emotions. Now, one key thing that I always recommend to everyone who struggles with expressing their emotions is writing. A lot of times this has helped me as well. It's not just a dear diary moment for me, but a lot of times if you're feeling angry about something and the situation, because of whatever reason, did not permit you to express your anger, did not permit you to express your frustration at that situation, you should definitely consider talking to the other person involved. Definitely consider that, especially if that person matters to you. You should definitely consider resolving that situation and at least telling that person how you felt in whatever time frame you can. But if that situation does not permit you to express out your anger or your frustration in front of the other person, you should at least express it on a piece of paper. And if we were involved directly, you were working with me or you were taking up sessions with me, I would advise you to write down everything you can, everything. Maybe express it out in 15, 20, 30, 50 pages, how much ever it takes, maybe till your hand hurts. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. And at the end of it all, burn the damn thing away. And it's almost cathartic when you do that. Anyone who has ever done that would understand when I say this. If you have just simply expressed everything you wanted to, not for the purpose of reading it again, not for the purpose of posting it on the internet as a blog, but just for the purpose of letting it out, just for the purpose of talking it out, burning it away, and just destroying away all of those thoughts and feelings and emotions, feels so cathartic, feels as if it's a big weight off of your shoulders. So I think I digressed a bit, but the key point from this entire thing was that one thing that you can benefit from when you talk about becoming more childlike is you should become more expressive with your emotions. You should become more spontaneous with what you think about, what you say, what you act on, and you should also become more expressive. You should definitely not hold back your emotions, especially around people who matter to you. And yes, I think do all of that and do all of that with the discernment of an adult, and I think you're golden. That's it. Let's take a little pause again and be back in, let's say, 5 seconds or so. All right, let's get back into it. The second thing that I would talk about when we are talking about how being childlike is better when you are an adult, the quality of being playful with life. I think this is something that all adults will agree with me when I say that when we were kids, when we were young, we were more playful with life. We were more comfortable considering life, our day-to-day life, as more of a game than something to be extremely serious about. I know this hits the back of our heads, at least at some stage in our life, that life is not something to be so serious about. And I think this is again one of those qualities of when you are a child, when you are a kid, you definitely are more comfortable playing with life. You definitely are more comfortable playing new games. You're also more comfortable playing with life as a whole. In fact, I think there's also some research that suggests that kids, especially very young kids, do not really distinguish between life and play. It's only when we grow up sort of and we start to distinguish between this is the part of my life that is not play and this is the part of my life that is play. So you get assigned those 1 hour periods during the day when you can play, but the rest of the time you have to be extremely serious, right? This reminds me of that quote from Alan Watts where he said that man suffers because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun. So true. It's so true. And it's especially true in our day and age where we have so much hustling to do, right? But anyway, when I'm talking about playfulness, I'm also reminded of this quote from my dear friend Rocco Jarman, who is, I have talked about him multiple times on this podcast and my YouTube channel previously. I think he's one of the sanest voices going around on the internet in this day and age. You should check out his work at eyeswideopenlife.org. So one of his quotes, which is actually about playfulness, he says, this is beautifully done. He says, first, the child must learn true gratitude. Then the adult can learn the playfulness of a child. Finally, the sage may learn to forget all. And not a single one of these words is wasted. It's so true. I think I'm going to dedicate a complete episode someday talking just about this entire quote. But what we can focus on right now is that second line. The adult can learn the playfulness of a child. I'm sure when Rocco wrote this quote, and even when you read this quote, you do not want playfulness to mean, again, that very, I don't know what are the right word for it, but not being sincere with whatever it is that you're doing. Kind of being, I don't know if glib is the right word, but one of these things, it's like not just considering anything to be serious or even being sincere with it. That is not the playfulness that we're talking about here. Rather, the playfulness that you should be thinking about when you think about the playfulness of a child is, in some manner of speaking, not worrying too much about the outcome, let's say. Not worrying too much about what others think of your actions, what others think of the outcomes that are arrived at after your actions. If you can let go of those few things, that will definitely make you more playful with whatever it is you're doing. At work, at home, in your relationships, even when you're actually playing. You can actually play if you learn to let go of the worry about the outcome. Of course, you have to think about an outcome. This is something we have talked about previously also. There's this quote from Bhagavad Gita where it said in Hindi, Karm kar phal ki chinta mat kar, which loosely translated in English would mean do your deed but do not worry about the outcome. A lot of times people conflate that with meaning that you should not even think about the outcome and just do whatever it is that you're doing. That's one way of going about it, but I don't think that's the highest way of looking at it. I think the best way of interpreting this quote is actually do the deed but do not worry about the outcome. Do the deed in accordance to whatever it is the outcome that you're looking for. So that does not mean do not think about the outcome at all. Think about the outcome, but do not worry about it because it's hardly in your control. If you start to worry too much about the outcomes, this is something that if you've been alive for a good number of years now on this planet, you would know that if you worry too much about the outcome of whatever it is that you're doing, whatever you can do in the present moment definitely gets hampered. So you think about the outcome, you align your actions with the outcome, and then play along with whatever the present moment offers. That's it. And yeah, so that's one way of looking at playfulness. One more way of understanding playfulness is that playfulness is almost at the heart of how we humans and even other animals learn everything. Very small babies, I think even a few months old, if babies are even just a few months old, they have a very playful habit of grasping whatever it is that they can see. And that's not just to find out the utility in it. It's not that babies are thinking that this might be useful, let me grab it. That's what an adult would think. But babies are just being playful with it. They just want to play with whatever it is that is around them. Let me grab this and play with it, grab this and play with it. And that's how, in fact, playing with it is how babies learn to stand, learn to walk, learn to crawl or run for that matter. And that's true for other animals too. But somehow when we grow up, we learn the ability to play with whatever it is that we're targeting to achieve. And in fact, if you think about it, doing something playfully, doing something with the perspective of playing to learn, doing to learn instead of doing to win is, I think, the best way of playing at life. You can be more playful with whatever it is that you're chasing, whatever it is that you're doing in life, if you are just centered in the present moment, if you can understand this is what I have to do in the present moment, and that's it. I'll play along with the present moment now. That's one way of looking at playfulness too. And I think one more perspective that jumps into my mind when I talk about playfulness is playing almost senselessly at times. It's like not everything that you do has to be absolutely pitch perfect sensible, you know, at least not sensible for others. Here's what I mean. There's a little caveat here. I remember when I was a kid, I used to have a friend of mine who was as mad about cricket as I was. And we were that mad that we used to, just the two of us, we would spend our afternoons in bright sunlight in northern India. We would spend our afternoons playing test cricket, just the two of us. We would just pick up a crazy ball like this and small little bats, just the size of our forearms maybe, and we would play 11 batters each side, 2 innings in a match, and we would play multiple matches. And I think every time I tell this to anyone, even people who are mad for cricket like me, even they consider that, dude, this is something senseless. And it is, I agree it is, but it used to be so much fun when we were doing it. I think my friend would also recognize, whenever we meet, we definitely talk about this, that this is something that, it's a story that sticks in our mind. We've done that, I think, for a complete summer where we played test cricket summer in his backyard or my backyard. It was glorious time. So even if it doesn't make sense to others, even if it seems senseless to others, we were playing with life. We were having fun. And that is definitely one of the, I don't know if it is the purpose of life as such, but it's definitely one facet of life that we lose out when we become adults. We become just too serious with everything. We become too serious with our lives. And we lose this fun-loving, senseless part of ourselves, which I think we can foster, at least at times. I think that's definitely one thing I would say. But now that I was talking about becoming more serious when we grow up as adults, I think one thing that springs in my mind is there are definitely aspects of our lives when we become adults about which we can be serious, right? For example, this was actually Rocco, whose name I just mentioned. He's written a beautiful new book. I'll be reviewing it soon on my YouTube channel. In that book, he had said something to the tune of, if something does not light up your entire soul, it does not deserve your complete energy. And I just love it. I'll repeat this once more. If something does not light up your entire soul, it does not deserve your complete energy. And I'll also extend that a bit to say that if something lights up your soul, if something feels so good to you that it lights up your entire being, it deserves your energy. So if you've actually found this, if you've actually found something that lights you up when you do it, I think it's okay to be serious about it. I think you should be serious about it, at least at times. You can be away from it at other times, but if something is feeling so good to you, and it's only you who can say that about yourself, but if you have found that something, I think you should be very serious about it. And in fact, I think things that light us up in this manner, we're always serious about them, and we're also always playful with them. And that happens spontaneously, like we talked about in the first case. Yes, I think that's definitely something, right? I mean, for someone, if you're one of those people who's feeling sort of low because you do not have that something that lights you up, I think it's okay. I think it's not inhuman to not have something that just lights you up. But let me tell you, if you have not found that something that lights you up, it is around the corner. It is definitely around the corner, because all of us have, like we talked about in episode 1 of this season, all of us have a certain purpose in our life that only we can really fulfill. You know, it's like I talked about life with a capital L, having all of these different holes, and all of us are different life forms, different lives with small L's popping up out of life to fill each of those holes. So all of us definitely have a certain purpose. All of us have definitely a certain something that will light us up. So if you are someone who has not found it yet for yourself, by the way, it does not really have to be a permanent something that you have to stick with throughout your life. You could have multiple such things throughout your life. But if you're someone who has not found it as of now, at this moment, any time spent looking for it is not time wasted. So I'll repeat this. if you do not have that spark right now, any time spent looking for it is not time wasted. So this is definitely, you should consider being more playful like a child, right? There are all of these different aspects of being more playful that I talked about. And one tip that I give out to almost everyone who talks to me about this is that if you want to be more playful with life, if you want a constant reminder of being more playful with life, I always recommend to keep something with you physically that reminds you of your childhood. For me, this crazy little ball that I showed earlier in the episode too, this is what reminds me of my childhood. This is what reminds me of those senseless plays that I used to have as a kid, of that carefree life as a kid. And it always brings a smile to my face. And in fact, this is something I joke about when I tell my friends that I think you gotta have balls to be childlike when you're an adult. Jokes apart, I think that's about it. This is how I would say you can be more playful with life as an adult. And this is also one aspect of being childlike that we kind of lose when we grow up, and we can reclaim. We can reclaim simply by looking at life differently, simply by acting at life differently. That's about it. Let's take another pause and we come on to the final section after this. Well, okay. Welcome back to the final session of today's episode. The third thing that I wanted to talk about, I think to recap, we talked about the first point was becoming more expressive to become more childlike. And the next point was becoming more playful with life. The third thing that I would talk about being a child, about being more childlike as an adult, is that you can be more flexible with the world. You can be more flexible with life. Now, this is something that is, I think, somewhat hard to explain, but I'm going to try anyway, because I think it matters. I think it matters a whole lot. As we grow up, as we keep spending more and more time with different people, different situations, different environments, we tend to become more rigid with time. It might seem almost counterintuitive, but the more experience you gain, the more limited you actually become. In just one manner of speaking, because it's almost like saying that new experiences, especially if you are not flexible enough, new experiences only limit you even more, because the self that experiences the new experience is the same. It's the same person going out into the Himalayas, and if that person was not happy with life in the city, would always find some or the other fault in some or the other person in the city. That person going into the Himalayas after having spent, I don't know, it'll be flexible, maybe a week or so in the Himalayas, would start finding the same flaws in different people also. In that manner of speaking, I mean to say that new experiences do not really teach us anything unless we are open to learning new things, right? So it's floated around that you should be open to new experiences, but I think again, it's not about what you do, it's how you do it. Even if you are open to new experiences, which means you are, let's say, traveling around or picking up new jobs every other year, etc. If you're open to this kind of new experiences, but yourself that lands in the new experience is the same old self, you are the rigid old, I don't want to use words here, but if you're the rigid old person it's the same rigid person who reaches that new experience, you do not really gain anything from that experience other than just maybe a confirmation bias of what you already thought was true. And this is especially true in today's day and age because, again, like we've talked about multiple times on this channel, the social media around us, the vast number of inputs going into our heads around us are always so humongous that confirmation bias of what we think to be true is just enormous for us. Never before in the history of Homo sapiens has any generation faced the impact of confirmation bias as much as we are. And therefore, even if adults my age are thinking that their older generations, the parents and the grandparents are very rigid. Wait before you think, you really become more self-aware of your own opinions. Because I can see this happening even with my generation. They are as rigid can be. And therefore, this is one point I definitely wanted to stress on, that becoming more childlike is definitely better in the sense that you become more flexible with life. Not that kids know that being flexible is good for them or is good for society as such. They're just naturally flexible. One big reason is that they don't know enough yet. They haven't learned enough yet to now unlearn. But that's neither here nor there. You have to understand that when you become an adult, when you grow up, when you have had enough experiences in life, those experiences, while they enrich your life, they also limit your life. And therefore, you have to become more aware of how you're looking at life, firstly. And again, when we're talking that we should become more childlike, we should definitely look to incorporate this aspect of being a child. Kids are so flexible, right? Kids are so open to new experiences. Like we talked about, just grasping anything that is in their vicinity. Not grasping it to use it always, but grasping it just to play with it. Grasping it because it excites them. And that is one aspect of being a child that we can definitely incorporate as an adult, but again with the discernment of an adult. So you become more flexible with life, you become more flexible with new experiences, but also realize that there's a lot in here that you need to unlearn, that you need to let go of to actually grasp that new experience. And this is something, in fact, there's this book that I'm reading right now. I talked about it in my latest newsletter, in fact. The book is The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. It's a beautiful book. It's a very technical book. It's a very hard read, really. But what he's describing is how our brains are, all of us have split brains, right? There's a left brain and a right brain. And he's talking about how these two brains are different in how they look at life. More than anything else, the biggest difference in these two parts of our brains is how they look at life and what is the story of life that they put forward to us. So with that aspect, there are two aspects of knowing anything. One aspect is the right brain way of, or rather, let's talk about the left brain way of knowing things first. The left brain way of knowing things would be very exact, very certain, very sure about something. So if I was to ask you about, what do you think about that girl? You have a very definite answer in that she's fair, she has brown hair, she has blue eyes, she's 5'4", she weighs so much, she sprints, she does yoga, whatever. Right? All of those things are very certain, and it's coming from the left part of your brain, which has a definite image of that person in its, let's say, in its storage. And then there is a right brain way of knowing that person. And the hardest part about the right brain way of knowing a person, knowing anything for that matter, is that your right brain is much more flexible about your experiences, which means that this is something that you'll relate to. When asked about that person, after, let's say, you have mentioned these kinds of specific details, after a point, you would say that you would start to get annoyed with a person who's continuously asking you about a person, because after a point, you say that, yeah, she's very friendly with me. Yeah, I've known her for, let's say, 20 years now. She's good at cooking. She does so and so. I can always rely on her for having a chat, etc. But if that person keeps probing you, tell me more. At some stage, you get irritated and you say that, you know what? All of what I know about her is my experience with her so far. It can change with time. And even if you get to know her, even if you meet her now, there's no saying that this is going to be your experience too. So if you really want to know that person, you need to put in the effort to know that person. I cannot say anything more than that. So this aspect of knowing a person in a flexible way, in a way that sort of acknowledges that there's a fixed image too of that person. There's definitely parts about that person that you know for sure, but also knowing that that person in the end is a person, is an ever changing personality, is more a verb than a noun. All of this aspect of knowing a person is actually your right brain way of knowing. And this is what I mean when I say that you should become more flexible with life, with knowing people, with knowing new things about the same person, in fact. That is an aspect of knowing someone, that is an aspect of knowing something which is almost lost in our day and age because, again, of the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias usually would stress things that you're very sure about, things that you can express in terms of even measurements, like I mentioned, fair, brown eyes, blue hair, whatever, blue eyes, brown hair, whatever. These things that you can be absolutely certain about, they keep getting confirmed more and more because of more inputs that keep coming into you, and that makes you much more rigid. And that especially happens when you become an adult. That especially is happening in the modern day and age. And therefore, one big message for today's generation is become more childlike, in the sense become more flexible with knowing new things, knowing new people, and knowing new things about the same people that you already know. Wow, that took some out of me. But yes, this is what I wanted to talk about. And one key aspect that I've noted down here is that, this is not really about being practical or finding more utility as such. This is something that I especially love talking about. That, in the modern day and age, a usual adult who considers himself or herself to be very practical would very easily rubbish all of this, saying that this is not practical, this is not useful. And I think the way we have arranged our lives is, in a manner of speaking, I can agree to it. Yes, this might not be too practical for you, but therein lies the catch too. I think this is something we talked about even in the previous episode, because I love this quote from Swami Vivekananda where he says, utility is not the test for truth. And if somehow something that is true is not a part of your life, it is how you have arranged your life that needs to change. Or you should at least consider changing it. And these are not easy to let go of truths. These are truths about your life, about life with a capital L, that matter. These two aspects of knowing are important, and all of us should understand that. So yes, the third aspect of being more childlike would be to become more flexible with life, to be more kind of an easy flowing, in a way, in a manner of speaking, but more inclined towards the right brain way of knowing someone. And by that I do not mean that your left brain way of knowing things, your certain way of knowing things is bad as such. But what I really mean is that that's an incomplete picture. And when the incomplete picture starts to be considered to be the whole picture, that is when we do not really know what we do not know. So we do not really know what we're missing out on. And we keep circling back to it. It's not really utility that you're missing out on, but it's rather that from this limited standpoint, you're looking for utility, and it's apparent utility that you think that there is no utility to it and therefore reject it. And that is a behavior of an adult which you will be better off letting go, unlearning. Yes, that's pretty much it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about in today's episode too. Becoming more childlike, getting these feelings of, I think we've all had these feelings, right? That as we grow up, we start to consider that life was better off when we were kids. We were so much more comfortable. We were so much more happier and easy flowing with life. There were less cares to think about, less worries to worry about. But I think growing up is a part of life. And if you can just understand whatever we talked about in today's episode, revisit it whenever you can, and try to incorporate what I talked about in today's episode, is not focused much on what you should do, The only what maybe is that you should keep something with you that makes you feel like a child again. Another what that we talked about was maybe that you should write if you can. But other than that, most of the things that we talked about in today's episode were centered around not what you should be doing, but rather how you're doing them, how you're looking at life. That is far more important, especially when we become adults, especially when we become very rigid in our ways of how we are doing things, how we are looking at things. Changing your how is absolutely more important. And that's it. I think that is where I'll conclude today's episode. If you have been following along on a podcast platform, make sure you check out all the other episodes. Make sure you leave the show a rating and a review, because those are good signals that you can give to the platforms to push this content out to more people. And you should also check out my Unlearning Playground YouTube channel, where the content is, like I mentioned before, it's quite different than the podcast now. Of course, the podcast is on YouTube, so you can check it out there as well, along with this beautiful smiling face. So that's about it for today's episode. I'll see you in the playground the next time. Until next time, peace out.